Okay, so we're up and running. Hello, hello,
Hey,
hello.
hey.
How you
All
doing?
right.
You all good?
Very well, yes.
Ambulance.
Yeah, I can just about see you.
Derek Morecambe, look.
Yeah, no, all well.
Good,
How's
good.
you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. It's been a while, been a little while, so back by unpopular demand.
They can't stop us.
They won't stop us. I've barricaded the door, nailed it from the inside. We'll keep broadcasting whatever happens. Come on, May. Trump won't close us down.
Oh God, don't talk about that. Blimey. God,
Uh,
I get shares from work, and they're always like the little sort of incentive to keep you there. And oh my God, like the arse has fallen out of them. I'm like, I might just go and work in Tesco's. Fuck it.
well, you wouldn't. I hope you haven't got any trips coming up to the US soon.
No, no, nothing at the minute. So
They'll be scouring your social media posts for all those anti-Trump comments, and you'll be detained in a cell for 6 weeks. See, just saying that will probably put me on a watch list somewhere. But
yeah, you know they're listening. You know they're listening. Well, thankfully, I'm more or less a Luddite, so there's so little social media out there to incriminate me that I'm all right.
Yeah. Some kind of tense scenes. Maybe I'm sure there'll be some more stuff happening over there soon. But maybe we should have a look at some of the stuff that's coming out of the US in terms of protests and so on. Kind of street level stuff. We haven't done anything yet on kind of being caught up in sort of civil unrest or protests and stuff like that, which kind of be an interesting topic to cover. I mean, I know we've had a lot in London in the last few years, in and around that sort of area by chance, perhaps. But yeah, we should probably crack on. Been a little while since we've done one, so I can't remember whose turn it was, but you kindly agreed to find something. Maybe you want to load it up and or say whatever you need to say about it. And
yeah, so just playing on some of the stuff from, I mean, it's covered regularly in class, and so I think we've mentioned it once or sort of twice before here, but knife crime in general is, it's a bit crunchy. You sort of, as soon as you bring tools into it, everyone knows what it's like to slice a finger. You extrapolate that, and it's pretty terrifying stuff, and it's commonplace. I mean, we live in Nottingham. I mean, it's really, really commonplace. You and I travel quite a lot, and in the UK and outside of, but even in the UK, I'm down sort of moving through London a lot, and it's now just normal. It's just sort of normal. You might not be involved, but there are incidents just so often and so prevalent. And
and you only hear about the kind of
worst cases.
The more extreme stuff or the more kind of shocking stuff. I'm sure that the statistics, from what I understand, show we only see the tip of the iceberg. The usual kind of day-to-day stuff of brandishing and threats and whatnot are pretty rife, especially in sort of major conurbations. But I mean, it's the thing that worries me most. It's the one thing that I'm spending more and more time on in class, more and more time thinking about. I think it's one of the things that combatives Krav Maga really has to offer over and above the kind of the stuff that you could get from other martial arts, right? You could be pretty decent at kind of stranger danger self-protection by said this before, by training kind of other good martial arts, sporting based martial arts. You get good at Thai boxing and judo, all that kind of stuff. You could be really good at that stuff, but the one thing it doesn't they don't tend to prepare you for is weapons, understanding weapons and the way that they get used and dealing with them. And I think that's where kind of if there's a virtue to combatives and Krav Maga, that's a major one, right, over and above what is offered elsewhere. And if you're teaching and you're not spending beyond the basics, you're not spending the lion's share of your time dealing with knives and multiple opponents, but particularly knives, I think, then you're kind of you're misusing your time. So yeah, no, I mean knives. I'm sure we'll keep coming back to knife incidents because so prolific and so variable that there's just so much to discuss about them. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, there's a whole range. I think when we the first or the second one that we did on this was that sort of the knife attack at the rally in Germany, and
Yeah,
that, you know, that's pretty extreme, you know, but that's not just down at the newsagents and a bit of beef and someone pulls out a knife and it either goes somewhere it doesn't. That is happening all the time, you know. That, you know, there's a whole range of, you know, what is a knife threat, and it's not always, you know, some sort of ardent terrorist, you know. It's you know, it's just beef sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, that one was, you know, some dude running around stabbing people for political reasons, terrorist stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, the kids down the by the news agents, or just someone that's unhinged, or just someone that, you know, just carries and loses their shit. I mean, I saw one the other day. I mean, it escalated pretty darn quick, where guy's kind of in his transit van. I think the passenger's sort of filming him, and some dude comes up, middle-aged guy comes up, you know, outside, and starts to sort of say to him, "What are you doing here? Why are you parked here? You need to move on." And so he's kind of taking the piss out of him out the window. He's got the window cracked a little bit, and he's, you know, "What's it to do with you, mate?" And the guy starts going on about his mother had problems here for years with people parking here, and it was you, wasn't it? And he goes, "No, nothing to really, jog on, mate, jog on." And sort of having a bit of a laugh, you know, not you know, sort of ridiculing him a little bit. And then the guy just changes and starts to, you know, F and blind at him and call him all the names. And you see, that's not normal. That's a bit weird. So he answers him back in the same tone, and the guy kind of moves away, and then he comes back. He just pulls out a blade and taps it on the window and tells, you know, starts screaming to him to get out. Right? And it's like, yeah, that escalated pretty darn quickly, right? The dude went from being kind of odd and unhinged, and maybe, you know, should just made a few smoothing noises and kind of put the window up and driven on, to actually pulling out a blade and trying, you know, threatening to kill someone through the window. Right?
Yeah. Probably with no concept of where that would go to. But
no, I mean, he looked totally mad.
It's in play. Yeah,
he looked totally mad. I mean, the dialogue revealed that, you know, he was probably off his meds or something, right? You know, he wasn't acting in a normal way. And one of the things that, you know, was trying to say is, you know, one of the things that we fear about, and people do fear the insane, right? You know, if you get someone odd, you know, it's kind of fearful, right? You know, I used to live in London, and you know, there's always someone that's not quite right on the tube or on the bus, right? And you know, in every carriage there's one that's acting out strangely. If there's not, then it's your turn. Yeah, it's taking turns each day. But yeah, I remember getting on the tube one day, and there was I sat down, I looked at the bloke next to me, he was wearing a pair of Speedos, Doc Martens, and a kind of a leotard top, with kind of red lipstick that's all smeared all over his face. And is this fancy dress? Oh no, this guy was you know, proper weird. All right, that was the one for the day. Exit quickly. You know, we usually pick up on that fairly quickly, and they create fear because they're unpredictable, right? And with this guy outside the van, you just realize actually that the dialogue, the discourse isn't quite how it would be between two rational, sane people. And that's a big red flag. You just got to give him a wide berth. Don't antagonize him any further and get gone, because otherwise it's gonna be go in a very unpredictable direction predictably.
There's plenty of them out there. So
anyway, should we have a look at this video?
Yeah, we'll have a look. It sort of stays on that theme, really. You know, It's almost like a dial down of sort of you know, knife stuff, but you know, no less serious. But let me absolutely biff how to share a screen now. Wait one.
The one that says share.
I've got that one. So I think I have to go to
share the wrong one. Is it? We get spanking Susie or something.
Yeah. No, it's all right. That's on the
fans
incognito
only.
page. I'm all right there. So
fans only, whatever.
Right, let me see. I'm going to hit share and then tell me what can you see?
Yeah, I can see to the I've seen that shopping mall, Facebook Reels, another stabbing in Dartford, England. Okay, Dartford.
Yeah. Which is, so it's sort of, I mentioned this a couple of times. We both travel about a bit, but I travel about a bit for work. I have projects all over the place. The one on the train, was a train that I take from sort of, Weybridge, Surrey into London. This is probably, the big sort of couple of shopping malls that are around Dartford, which is, not a million miles from another project of mine. So these are all places that I'm walking and going getting a brew and a bagel and a sit down and whatever. And, so it's pretty normal. So I'll hit play.
Well, my son used to spend a lot of time down sort of Kent way, and they always used to go into Dartford to go to the to the shopping malls.
For a knife fight. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. Right. I'll run it through. Let me know if the sort of the speech is okay.
Okay. Let's have a butcher's. Whoa. Oh, it's that Icepick grip that no one ever attacks in. Oh, it's so unrealistic. Hey, in broad daylight. Dude, what are you doing? Oh, moment of realization, self-realization. The penny just dropped. Whoa. Man, he's a tall guy. Yeah.
So we'll play it out. Not much happens now, but other than the sort of the attitudes of the folks.
In the same direction. Rather than opposite direction. Wow, it's still there. Is he still tooled up? Surely not still tooled up.
His hands are empty.
Wow. Oh yeah, let's watch it again. Oh, there's that Icepick. Wow, right in the back.
Yeah.
That downward stab Icepick that we're always told. Why does Kramagal spend so much time with it? So unrealistic. No one ever attacks like that.
That was the opening shot. So I'll see if I can. I don't think I can wind that back. Wait one. Right, here it comes.
Whoa, big jumping one. Yeah. And again, and again, and
2,
again.
3, 4 of those.
5, 6.
5 for the 5th.
On the end of his hook. He's got his left hand out, off hand working. Live hand back. He really wants a piece of him, doesn't he? At this point, he's awareness of the consequences. Suddenly, he's broken through his bubble.
He suddenly threw the fuck out.
Yeah, no, he suddenly realised where he is, and all right. So lots of interesting stuff here. I have no idea what this beef was about. Do you know anything about it? No, don't tell me yet. But okay. So initial impressions. Obviously, got into it. Who knows if they know each other or not, or whether this is some sort of argument. It doesn't look like a robbery. But it's obviously something that's boiled over, and the big tall guy in the grey sweatshirt, what's he hanging around trying to fight someone with a knife for? I mean, he looks like he could probably run fairly quick. He's pretty fit looking guy. He's got a backpack on as well, right? There's an immediate shield.
Yeah.
But he seems to take it off and drop it. Is that what happens? Run through it again, see what happens to the backpack.
So he's just jumped in. I'll go back to the start. There you go.
Yeah.
Look, he's already holding the backpack like he wants to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And the moment he gets an opportunity, for whatever reason, he drops it. He's lost it by the time we see him again.
Oh yeah, he's dropped it there. You can see it on the floor. He's thrown it down. He's backed off. He's going to try and box him.
Boxing him out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so here's a few random things. I mean, getting rid of the backpack and not using it, in the moment, I'm sure you don't think of these things, but that was a perfect opportunity to use that as a bit of a shield. Okay, so analytically breaking it down, not sure what it's about. obviously a weapon's been drawn, but the guy in the grey shirt doesn't get on his toes and run, stands there willing to fight. Well, there's perhaps a braver man than I am, but or slightly more foolish. There's only really one winner with that unarmed situation against a knife. Dicing with death there. I'm thinking of that one in the Australian, I think it was Australian shopping mall, with the kids walking through, and they're backing off. The one with the knife is backing off. Another one goes up, kind of closes on them, giving them a load of verbals rather than running away, and he just gets that slash across the throat and bleeds out within about 6 seconds. Collapses and bleeds out. That takes one shot. Willingly engaging is quite clearly not the best option there. So opportunity to escape. He had an opportunity to kind of use the backpack, or loads of other stuff around there as well, like flasks and stuff lined up on the counter. So no absence of weapons of opportunity. Looked fit and strong, right? So probably had a bit of power behind him. I thought it was interesting, as kind of was wanting to engage, didn't want to. They got to that sort of Mexican standoff at the end, and I thought it was interesting how the guy in the grey sort of pointed over his shoulder, as if to point to security guards or something. He had a quick look round,
which were behind him,
and then I think the penny dropped, that kind of moment of realization as to what the hell am I doing? Right, I've just pulled a knife and stabbed someone in broad daylight in a shopping mall. Right, actually, that's probably not a good thing to do. Right, the red mist suddenly kind of evaporated a little bit at that point, and he burst out of his bubble that he was in that kind of tunnel vision bubble, or one-mindedness, single-mindedness, where he just kind of excluded all other things, consequences and whatnot. And suddenly he's brought back to reality and thinks, oh hell, and then probably the adrenaline starts to leave him pretty quickly. He starts to feel very tired at that point because he realizes what he's done. The regret, probably starting to seep in at that point. But it still look like he's fairly combative, even when the security guards have got hold of him. The guy in the grey goes back at him again. Right, again, if he's still tooled up, that's pretty risky. And goodness knows what security guards were doing while they hadn't flattened him on the floor. If you're going to get involved, right? Take him to the floor. You've got involved with a guy with a knife. Don't want him ambulatory for too long. I didn't see if they'd taken it off him. I couldn't quite work that out from a couple of run throughs. But my guess is he didn't visibly have anything in his hand, so he'd either put it away or they'd taken it away from him. But either way, just trying to usher him out probably wasn't the best tactic. And the guy in grey is going back for another go. He's probably feeling righteous indignation. But then again, there's a lot of righteous corpses in the graveyard. And the physical side of it, interesting. That said, that Icepick grip, which we're told no one ever uses, right? Actually, I've seen loads of videos where that is the kind of go-to thing. It's kind of a gross motor skill, right? It's not a trained slice and dice kind of thing. It's a gross motor skill. Constantly hammering away with something in your hand, and using that offhand to keep him away from stopping the weapon. Jumping in, crossing the gap, but
big jump at the start.
In fact, we were doing this in class this week. There's lots of different kinds of ways of using that knife in terms of your energy. One is to try and rush in and jump all over him and then stay there and like go sewing machine. The other one is that kind of dodging in and out behavior, hanging back on the kind of the porch area of the front door and not stepping through it. Trying to keep out of reach until that opportunity presents itself, where the guy in grey will overcommit a little bit and just be able to get another one of those stabs in. It looked like the first one went in the back of his shoulder or neck. Interesting behavior, kind of keeping distance, trying not to get sucked in and punched, grabbed and controlled, but to keep the knife out of the way, use that offhand to create distance, or to grab hold, and to lever it up as a bit of defensive motion perhaps, and then use that to stab in. The guy in grey was, being swung around and pushed about and getting stabbed up. I mean, got his arm up at one point, I saw, to kind of protect his head.
I think that was more sort of like pure flinch reactions than considered defense. So looks like the weapon is quite short.
Yeah.
And that first shot does clearly reach over him and gets him. Now, from the rest of what I've read of the news article, the guy in the grey was completely unharmed.
Wow.
And I think it was pure luck that perhaps just the curvature of how he'd made the bag where it sat and the fact it was fairly short, it didn't get him at all. But that wasn't through any judgment.
No, I mean, he literally
chance.
He looked like he was a bit of a boxer or something. He'd done a bit of boxing with the way he moved his head.
Yeah.
He ducked his head and caught it on the back of the shoulder. So exactly. Kind of super lucky in that respect.
Yeah, and so like you say, the Icepick thing, there's clearly a bit of a height disparity. I believe it was just a beef. I don't know if it was a beef from in the moment or a beef from somebody who knew somebody or whatever. It wasn't somebody going out intending to stab someone.
Yeah.
It was clearly an escalation from whatever. We don't see that. But the fact is, somebody else is tooled up with something that they're pulling out and willing to stick into you. Yeah. No planning. Clearly not the guy who is walking around with a knife, dealing with problems with a knife. And you get that lunging, that sort of gang knife problem that we've seen before. It wasn't that. It was clearly he's tooled up for whatever reason, and he just pulls it out and just goes. Just luck. Luck that it wasn't worse.
Again, it sounds like from what you say, another ego-based problem. An argument that escalated pretty quickly and beyond what one of them thought. Guy in grey probably thought it would be a fist fight, and it turned out not to be. Came with his fists and came with his fist to a knife fight. It's not a good trade. But an ego problem, right? And as with all ego problems, it takes two to argue. Don't argue with strangers. Don't fight with strangers. It doesn't turn out well, right? That's you just don't know who you're messing with, right? You don't know what the other person is thinking or is capable of doing, right? And there's the point about that, I guess, with the guy in the van and the one tapping on the knife with the window as kind of non-sane, non-rational thought, right? You kind of think if you're in an argument, the person you're arguing with is operating in the same terms as you are. They're in the same paradigm of indignant at something happened, give you a piece of my mind, not going to treat me that way. And you kind of expect, our default position is to expect that the other person's going to be the same, at base they're rational or so on, or it'll be some sort of monkey dance where there's an educational beatdown, and that's the game you think they're playing because that's the one that you're playing. And then suddenly you realize that you're in a whole different kind of sport and they're not playing that game and they're just going to kill you. And that's where the kind of the realization hits home that it's just not sensible to argue with strangers or let alone fight with them.
Ego management,
as usual. But fairly young guys, I guess, just not experienced to keeping a lid on that sort of stuff, and maybe have always kind of not sort of trying to crystal ball gaze or anything, but maybe used to being quite dominant or whatever. He's a big guy, right? Perhaps used to
broad shoulders, little legs,
people being wary of him. Maybe just he's an imposing figure. People are wary of him, and suddenly he's got someone who's not wary and will pull out a weapon and try and stab him. That doesn't compute, right? All that, I've got to stand here and stand my ground and teach him a lesson. It's still kicking in rather than yeah, that's not a good place to be. I'm off. And even after he's, what I thought been stabbed and the security again, he still wants to engage. Right?
Yeah.
Guy's only got to break free and stab him again, and
Yeah.
it's
He'd
done.
been. It was clear the guy in grey was, yeah, like you say, not crystal balling, but there didn't seem any realization of the danger he had been facing.
No.
Because he kept moving to a position where the moment they disengaged, he moved to a position of, standing my ground, waiting my time. But when they were engaged, actually, I didn't see him throw any punches. He didn't try to stop anything other than putting an arm up, which I think was a flinch for not getting knocked in the head. He made no grabs at him. He didn't wrap him up. He didn't hold him. He didn't even reach to stop the arm. He just sort of was there moving. He was moving to his right. The guy was moving to his right, and they were orientating around and just missing each other.
Yeah.
And I think only the fact that I think it was a beef, and like you say, the realization of the guy with a knife that, what the fuck am I doing? It's the middle of the day. I'm surrounded by security. I've just started stabbing a dude. That wasn't the plan when I came down to buy a pair of trainers in JD Sports. I think there's only that didn't escalate it into somebody getting stabbed the fuck up.
Yeah, that's a good point. You thinking about it, but I was concentrating more on sort of the knife and the arm. I didn't really see the guy in grey, the tall guy, cook off any shots.
Nothing. There was this sort of weird but nothing like he'd actually ever hit a thing or was trying to stop a thing.
But then retreated into kind of boxing footwork and hands moving like he was ready to throw a jab cross, but actually couldn't bring himself to hit the other person. We've spoken about this before. In the moment, it's very difficult to start throwing punches from nothing when you're shocked and suddenly in a situation. Right, it's actually quite a mental leap to start fighting back, and unless you're used to getting hit and then just immediately firing stuff back without even thinking, right? Or getting stabbed, but you think you've been punched or whatever, and immediately firing stuff back, right? If you've got any cognitive space between then, you're not going to do anything, right? It's going to take you a while to get in the game. And the other guy was motoring, right? He was wanting to get him, waggling his wrist around and taunting him, I guess, right? Showing him what he had, right? Trying to intimidate him even further. Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, again, fairly ineffectual in his defensive efforts.
Yeah. But you mentioned that, sort of he assumed a boxing style, and not bad. It didn't look like he'd never stood like a boxer before.
No,
but
hands were a bit
clearly
low.
Didn't know what he was going to do about it. And that first roll of the shoulder and stuff like that. The guy's no professional boxer, but it's not that he's never stood in a ring and he's never done a bit of training, but the naivety and the inability to put it into context of actual scenario-based violence. And we've talked not on here before, but psychologically, when it kicks off, and if you've got a kid with you, you've sort of grown up, as sort of, your son's got bigger. If there's any problems when they're little, if it gets any sort of slight sort of agginess, they gravitate towards the middle of it. They don't move away. There isn't a fear and they back into a corner. They sort of go right in the middle of where the worst, if it's going to go anywhere, it's going to go off here. And the kid goes, I'll just move into the middle of that and fuck it all up and look at everybody. It was almost that sort of idea from the guy, was like, I'm still here. He didn't know to fuck off. And even when the security were involved, he sort of was overlooking at what was going on, but he was spectating. He wasn't dominating the situation.
That old adage of I'll just run away. Well, it's surprising how many people don't, isn't it? Right? When have you ever seen anyone just run away? You forget about that, even if you're a trained person, right? If you're being taught to run away in class, right? And this is the old adage, I just run away. well, if you've been taught to run, are you actually practicing running? Right? Are you actually practicing running, thinking about running
What's your
away from a
100-yard
threat like
dash
that?
like?
And then also, really where are you going to run to? How far are you going to run? Do you know you can outrun this dude, right? Maybe you can outrun him, right? I don't know. But yeah, it didn't even occur to him, even if he was of the thought I'd run away. He was so invested in that moment, so dialed into it and sucked into it that even when the guy was kind of no longer an immediate threat because the security were around him, he was still kind of wanting to go back and fill him in or whatever it was. But yeah, I mean the virtue of a good right cross at any point there, right? Chin down, neck up, and just banging a big right cross on the button, and chances are he would have, if he could hit, and the assumption that he looked like he'd done a little bit, if he could hit, that would have probably have got him the initiative back if he had to stay there. And, a couple of good right crosses would probably have done for that dude. Given the guy's size, if he could hit his weight, it would have done for that dude. And again, I think that's an important lesson from things like this, which is if you're being defensive, which he was, right, then it's just a matter of time before he gets in on you, right? Your best option there is to take the fight to him if you can't immediately get away, right? First of all, arm yourself, right? He had a bag, could have grabbed some stuff if it was convenient.
He took the effort to get two shoulders of a bag off.
But
and
arm
throw it on the
yourself,
ground.
get to a weapon, right? It's great having all these sporting backgrounds, but the first thing is get to a weapon if you can, right? In a situation like that, get to a weapon, right? Don't go flesh and bones against that, and then you got to be counterattacking. In that situation with him at that distance, no point trying to kick the dude, right? Stab you through the leg. And he's also too much in and out. I suppose one big driving stomp might have had some effect, but a good right hand straight down the pipe and then follow it up with a couple more would be a preferential option. I mean, I don't think you're closing to grappling distance and control from there because the dude's arms out the front and so on. He's holding that back. You're just going to get stabbed as you're trying to climb the rope up to him. And so a couple of big right hands down that pipe. But yeah, shows the virtue of watching different situations from a training perspective, right? And we do replicate that. Replicated something very similar to that in class this week. Armored up assailant with a knife, other dude with boxing gloves on, and we did one round of the guy trying to keep his distance, keep the person who's doing the drill away from them, and jump in and stab them when the time is right, but not to close on them. And then another round of closing and getting close and trying to go sewing machine. So you get those two different dynamics of someone that wants to stay away and someone that wants to get close, and trying to deal with those two issues. It's very different kind of modes of attack with the knife, and you've got to have something for both of those. And all other eventualities as well, right? You'll have something for all of those. And that only comes from live training.
So, and having something, it doesn't. It's sort of. It's not. You're not talking about 10 years of drilling all the fucking knife attacks in the world and whatever. You're talking about at least have considered this and have run through a thing. At least have fought back once against it, because for us sort of extrapolating what might have been the situation with these two guys, there was, apart from the guy, it sounds a bit daft, apart from the guy who is sort of clearly stabbing for sort of 5 or 6 seconds sort of like intensively, there's almost no violence, and there's no counter violence. There's no plan, and it's like, well, I would just no, you wouldn't. You would clearly just hold your arms out and have longer arms than him, and as a result, he wound down for whatever reason. He wound down, and it's luck that he wound down. You didn't resolve the situation.
Yeah. So here's a thought. I mean, I don't go on social media a lot because it just irritates me. All the different videos up. I see people teaching stuff that I've been teaching for 20 years like it's brand new, uh, so I don't, but there's all this stuff at the moment, well, what technique for this and what technique for that, and my knife technique's better than your knife technique, and I look at them, and my reactions are kind of boredom most of the time. Oh, well, we're going to do this, and then we're going to make like this, and we're going to make like this, and then someone plays that video and critiques it and goes, oh, but no, they need to do it like this, and they need to do it like this. There's no point punching the person with a knife. You've got to get in and tie it on, close on them, as though they have like the access to this truth and they see it so clearly. And my reaction to those kinds of videos is, look, I just think you're all wrong, right? If you're looking at the level of individual techniques, and this is the way that you've got to do it, and this technique is the best because we've got our little fingers stuck to our ring finger rather than out, or whatever it is, and that's the way it has to be. As it strikes, it reminds me of Talmudics, like biblical studies, right? It's like, I hope I don't offend anyone here, but you hear two kind of Bible scholars arguing with each other about the proper interpretation. This one cites this verse and this verse and this verse and this verse, and you think, oh, that sounds really convincing. They got all these verses that support this particular interpretation, and the other one goes, oh, no, but there's this verse and this verse and this verse and this verse, and they both sound really plausible. And then I have to think to myself, well, actually, they're both just talking nonsense, right? It's like, you can cite all this stuff, but at the end of the day, right, I just don't believe the premise on which you're working. And so when I see these kind of technical videos of, this is our knife defense and this is our knife defense closing, and what we have here is an epistemic problem, right? What is my question to him is, right, how do you know? Right? How do you know that that's better than that? How do you even know that that will work? Right? What basis do you have to say this? Now, I understand, within a kind of there's things that just obviously are more likely than other things, right? Death touch to the rear wisdom tooth or whatever with the dragon's beak is not going to work, right? But within this kind of broad frame of combative stuff that we have, right, how do you know which one's the better technique? Well, there are only two ways of telling, really, right? One is evidence, right? Is there any empirical evidence? Well, actually, unfortunately, there's not enough knife attack. Well, unfortunately, there's not enough knife attacks where those particular skill sets from those trained in this particular school that's so valued has been employed and can be said to work under all these different circumstances. Just too many variables, not enough cases. So you can't rely on anything other than just kind of very basic evidence as to what works. The only other thing you got then is reason, right? And that's when the problems kick in, because again we don't reason objectively, right? It's a well-known phenomenon that we engage our powers, and the smarter we are, the more we engage them to reason from a position that favors us, motivated reasoning. So you'll employ your powers of reason to basically cherry pick facts and points that justify what your beliefs are, right? Not to challenge your beliefs. And so that's all you hear, right? You hear like this kind of motivator, oh, look at the logic of this, how is this reality, how can this work? And that sounds really plausible. And then you hear the other guy and he goes, oh, but how can you think about this when the hand is like this? And it's like, okay, yeah, that sounds really reasonable as well from your perspective, but all we're doing is just hearing kind of opposing stories on the basis of foundation where you don't really know, right? All you're doing is trying to apply some logical reasons to this, and I get the reasoning process, but just way too many variables. And so I get frustrated with these kind of technical kind of videos and responses to it, because I think actually, look, and this is where things kind of get complicated. The techniques are there to be learned and then forgotten, right? So learn the set of techniques, learn your 360, learn your cover and fends, learn your block and clinch, do all of that, but make them live drills, right? You can't just practice the technique in isolation 1,000 times and think that you have knife defense. You don't, right? You have to do it in live drills with resisting opponents where you're getting stabbed all the time. And you might employ some parts of those techniques, right? You might employ some of the motions, but what you're doing is you're getting an ingrained sensitivity to things like timing, distance, threats, body motions, small micro tells. You're adjusting your position, you're using your physicality, you're learning the movement patterns that allow you to do certain things reliably, right? And if you're not training like that, and over the years I do more and more live drills, as you might want to call it, more and more drilling, right? More and more partner drilling under pressure than I do technical learning. Baseline, practice the techniques. Then you've got to drill it with a resisting opponent or a resisting opponent, specific things that you're going to work on. So specific drillings with resistance and so on, non-cooperative, and treat it like that. I mean, it's otherwise, I just think it's just a nonsense, right? It's been here before. Say to a boxer, what's your favorite technique in the ring? What do you mean? Well, what's your favorite technique? What tech? If he does this, what's your technique to counter it? And most people go, well, I have no idea what you mean. I haven't got any techniques. Or even if they do understand that, they go, I don't know, whatever comes out.
Yeah.
Whatever comes out, I don't know. I'm a counterpuncher. Whatever comes out, I'm going to move. I've got head movement, I've got body, and they're thinking in terms of attributes, right? Physical attributes. Using their distance, using their timing, using their knowledge of space and angles, right? Which is ingrained through constant practice. And of course they can punch like mules. Right? They can punch correctly, and they know how to do the footwork correctly. But then they've learned that, and then they've owned it, and then they've thrown it away, and then they're moving naturally. They don't have to think. They don't have to think, oh, well, if he throws a right punch, then I'm going to step to my left with my left foot. I'm going to pivot round with my right, and then I'm going to throw a cross back across it. Like, no, right? You've done that 1,000 times in training to the point at which it's just second nature. And so I think, actually, you can practice all these specific techniques as much as you want, but unless you throw yourself into the water of actually, kind of drilling it relentlessly in a kind of at least a semi non-compliant way, then you're probably wasting your time. Yeah. Sorry, rant over. I do get frustrated with these things, but
right, that's why we're here. So yeah, but no. In interesting, at least in that little snapshot, that it goes down in all manners of ways, and you'll do what you'll do. I think that that really comes out for me is you'll do what you'll do. The guy with the knife did what he did, and then he just sort of like petered out and just went, what the actual fuck, and let himself be led away by the security guys who were sort of holding him like gently at the wrist. There was nobody getting their face stomped into the ground. There was no one going, guy's got a knife, I'm gonna split him in half now, and then let the rozzers just come and mop him up later, which is sort of perhaps our mentality.
Well, I mean, it is interesting in how easy, probably wrong selection of vocabulary, but how it kind of just sort of petered out to a certain extent. Like you said, no one stepped up and just brained him.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
No one. I didn't see what was around, but no one took their jacket off, put one of those flasks inside it, and just cracked him across the top of the head and killed him outright. Right. But you kind of think, well, that wouldn't have necessarily been an overreaction. He's trying to stab some dude. Someone comes up and just brains him from behind.
Is he starting to stab everyone in the place?
But everyone's just stood around watching. And then, like you say, the security guards kind of, it's like leading him out, escorting him out. It's like, are they really going to just escort him to the edge of the? Why haven't they put him on the floor and his arms up his back and his head's pulled back and he's screaming for his mum? But
it's attempted murder. It's attempted murder at least, and he was led gently to the fire exit, you know.
And yeah, and yeah, I understand security guards don't really want to get knifed, but you know that I would feel for their own safety. But I think what you saw there was kind of the deflation that happens when you realize it's done and you've made a huge mistake, right? That I think that realization sat in, and just suddenly he probably felt really weak and feeble, and you know all that energy had drained from him, and he probably starting to shake, and he'd starting to get nervous about it. All that's coming now, and he's probably just biddable at that moment, right? He's the adrenaline hasn't dropped again when he's got to get away. Right? He's got to try and not get seen, not get caught. Right? He's just given up the ghost at that point. He might get it back, right? He might get a secondary dump of adrenaline at some point when when it kicks in. He's going to go to prison now, and now he needs to get away. So he might have got it back. That's the dangerous spot, right? That's tightening your helmet straps after the battle, right? If he'd suddenly got angry again because they were trying to restrain him, and he's still got that blade on him, then he's going to stab his way out of that as well. In for a penny, in for a pound. If he stabbed one person, might as well stab the others to get away. You're not gonna get too much more if you get caught. But yeah, no, I mean, very fortunate all the way through. I mean, the ones that we've looked at generally, they've all been rather fortunate not to be more seriously injured.
Yeah. A few
Mm-hmm.
of late. Yeah. So, interesting. Very good.
Yeah. So all this, well, what can you do about the front arm? We could go through the techniques of, clearing that front arm out the way, trying to punch him, blocking that arm with the knife, trying to punch him, or clearing it, controlling it, taking him to the floor, exercising number 2 and number 3 control on his arm, taking him down, all that kind of stuff. But, those are isolatable drills, right? Skills and drills. But it's interesting to see that particular example of someone keeping distance and stabbing like that, overlaps with what we do.
Naturally keeping distance. The guy wasn't, he didn't want his knife arm grabbed, so he stuck the other one out. And once he did that, you've got feet of clearance before you close in on that. You've got something blocking you and a body, and there's none of that climbing up that arm unless you're getting it as it's coming in.
Yeah, and even if you're getting a block out to that arm, you've got that front arm working really well, right? You're not gonna grab it, right? It's going to come straight back, right? So if you're only working closing the knife, controlling the person, putting them off, then you got a problem when someone stays back from you with that knife and just wants to prick at you from a distance. And even if you're more comfortable at that range, you still got a problem with that front arm. And the only way you can kind of learn how to do that is by kind of working with it all the time. That's a great drill to practice that kind of situation. If you're not doing that with some full contact on a regular basis,
and a committed attacker. I mean, I think.
Or an uncommitted one like that, right?
Well, uncommitted,
he was committed to not being committed, right?
Intent,
yeah.
It's enough.
And that's why we spoke about in the past. I take from kind of the years of combat sports is that they drill in the right way, right? Specific sparring, learning the mechanics, ingraining them. We're not talking about your 3-week, 8-week self-defense course. We're talking about, again, people who are training for many years. The thing to be is training like the combat sports people, but with our particular emphasis on knives and bats and bottles and all the whole other spectrum of kind of awareness, de-escalation and stuff as well. Otherwise, you're just training to be bad boxers. But if you're not doing that other stuff, you're just training to be, Krav Maga, learn to punch a bit and kick a bit. You've got to be able to hit hard. But if you just want to box, you're better off going to boxing. Krav Maga offers is the other stuff. And the other thing, that we keep coming back to and say time and time again is, in that situation, I said it before, if you a couple of good right hands, but you've got to be able to hit really hard. right? You've got to be able to hit really hard, right?
And stick it on a point.
Yeah, and with some accuracy, and hence that timing, that fluid motion, he's dodging in, dodging out. You've got to have that innate, you've got to have that trained ability with the timing and the distancing and so on to be able to hit hard on that kind of thing. That comes with, again, live practice, sparring and so on. But you've got to be able to hit really hard. I mean, there's no point having the best, 360 or cover and fend or, whatever it is, escape from a headlock or whatever it is, if you can't hit that dude hard enough to stop him, right? If you're not up to that level of hitting hard, then that's what you got to focus on.
Yeah.
Generating enough power to stop another human being with 1 or 2 shots. As long as you hit him clean, right? Beyond that, it's going to be cumulative. But if you're not, then training's not organized in the right way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. People get bored of that. I mean, that's one of the strange things, though. In class, we do a lot of punching, do a lot of striking, do a lot of palm strikes and slaps, and we do it week in, week out. Well, yeah.
There's a reason, right? That's what you're going to need.
You need maybe 2 or 3 things, and you need to be able to hit so hard with them that the person doesn't get up. Right? And if you can't, then that's why we do it week in, week out, so that you get better at it. Right? But you can have all the fancy techniques in the world, and A, not have the wherewithal to apply them because you never practice them against a resisting opponent, and B, even if you do get out of your headlock or your choke, they're just going to rip you a new one because you can't actually hit them hard enough to stop them.
Yeah. That brings us nicely on to, if we just sort of round it off as we have the last couple, things now, or at least things that you appreciate now that you perhaps didn't back in earlier days. What sort of, anything from this particular, there's a couple of things that jump out from our conversations for me that we've mentioned.
That's a good one. I know I asked you that last time. It came as a request. What would we do different, or what? No. I think last time I talked about lifting programs and 5x5. So let me give you something more martial arts related. So I mean, I've always trained live drills, judo, boxing, and so on. So nothing around that. I mean, that's always been there. I suppose here's something slightly different, right? Training partners. I think, I spent a lot of my life training solo because I couldn't find good training partners until I started teaching. And then you get students, like yourself and the rest of the crew coming through. Then you've got regular training partners, although then you end up spending most of your time teaching rather than training. But so training becomes slightly less, but at least you have people to train with. But up until then, people who had similar interests to me, always getting regular training partners outside of class, right? So you can go to class, so you go to judo class 3 times a week, whatever it is, you can do your judo, you got training partners, but you got to train outside class. You can do your weights, you can do your running. I wouldn't run long distances anymore, pounding the streets for 10k at a time. I think that was a total mistake. I wasted too much time doing that. 15 minutes doing hill sprints would have been, twice a week would have been a far better use of my time in terms of cardio and strength, and probably never wouldn't have been so thin as I was at that age. But I think having good reliable training partners to train with outside of class, right, and being more proactive in trying to find them, saying to people, look, do you want to train every Saturday morning at this time doing this kind of stuff, and then having the balls to kind of lead on what you want, right? Let's do this, let's do that, rather than turn out and go, what should we do? Should we hit a few pads? All right then. And you do the same thing over and over again. Find people to train with who are reliable and want to train and want to improve, whatever your game is, outside of class. That's where you improve. That's where you get the skills bedded in, is the extra flight time outside of class. The class is the place to learn stuff, and then to test it with people that you're not always training with, right? It's kind of the top of the iceberg, but the rest of the work goes on underneath. Find people that are reliable, want to train hard, want to train regularly, are willing to work on the same kind of stuff as you, and make it a regular thing and put the effort in there. And even if that means training with people who, or in stuff that isn't your ideal. It's better to have regular committed training partners doing some stuff that's relevant to you than to train occasionally with people who are like the mustard, right? You know, so I see a lot of people go, oh, I go off to seminars with this great combatives instructor, right? They train like once every 3 months. And the rest of the time, they're not training with anyone, right? You're not putting in 10 or 12 hours a week with other partners out, you know, outside of class, right? You know, they're not doing that. So I think that would be my you know, try and hunt down as many committed, like-minded training partners as you can get, so you can fill your diary as much as you want with outside, you know, even if it's training in the garage or the class, the arc or something like that, that supplements your solo training. The more partner training you can do, specific sparring, that kind of stuff, the better. That would be my advice looking back. Less solo training, more partner training outside of class. It's difficult because not many people are as committed.
Well, that's the flip side, and perhaps perhaps from my point of view, I think you know, you and I, and you know, sort of, you know, many of the people we know think that this is normal, and this is not normal. We are definitely not normal.
No?
Most people want to learn a thing for a reason, and they stick at it for long enough until they feel confident with it, and we've willingly subjected ourselves to probably lifelong sort of detriment, you know, with some sort of injuries and bits and bobs that we have, for the sake of us being committed to this. And you know, you want those training partners, and you want those committed training partners all the time. And you know, I've been fortunate, like you, to have found those in my life, sort of for a lot of it. But you know, it's hard work, and there's few and far between, because you're not normal in wanting to do this all the time.
But if you have the luxury of, you know, the desire to do it, then you know, you can usually, you know, with a bit of gumption, you know, you say to people, even if you don't know them so well, you know, is there any training going on outside of the class? You know, maybe get 2 or 3 of us together once a week or something, just to do a bit of extra training, you know, and just be a bit more pushy on that. And even going, you know, if you haven't got this kind of resources, and going to other places where, you know, maybe it's not exactly what you want to do, right? You know, maybe the karate club down the road isn't really what you want to do, but if there's regular training partners there available, you better do that than, you know, hit a pad you're holding for yourself in your bedroom. You know, it's like, that has limited benefits, you know.
You have to seek them out. For sure. Because
what about yourself? What's your answer to your own question?
Yeah, okay. I think a little bit, I don't know, I think we sort of touched on it here sort of plenty of times. It's probably becoming a theme, but sort of, you know, don't believe the hype too much. You know, there used to be books, and now there's sort of the social media aspect of it. But if you want to resource a thing that you are interested in or working on or diving into, there is an infinite amount of range and opinion and options, and so many of it is just that, untested, like you were saying earlier, just that opinionate, you know, this is how I think it should be. No, this is how we think it should be. This is how we find that it works in training. And it's really easy to look into it and get yourself completely overwhelmed. And I think just, you know, I flipped it now and again, you know, when I was younger, different martial arts and boxing in the army and all these kinds of things. And as soon as you find something new and something a bit sort of crunchy that your mate recommends, and you dive into that, and you can get lost down a little bit of a trail of, you know, here's the next new thing, and there's nothing new under the sun. And we've always had 2 hands and 2 feet, and they've only worked in a certain manner. You know, don't necessarily think that because it's well advertised and it's shiny, that it's got any value behind it. Try classes, by all means, don't just, pick and commit to one thing. Don't sign up to the sort of, the wushu school of whatever and commit 25 years of your life to that without looking around. But bear in mind,
dedicated my life to kung fu.
I think you heard that. Yeah, we know, we've had literally that quoted.
Yeah.
But I tell people that story a lot. But yeah, go and try things. But find an instructor that you think could hold their own. Don't buy into too much advertising. Don't listen too much to what's said. See what's being done. And I think it's just as simple as that.
Yeah, cross train a little bit. If you've got time, cross train. But at the end of the day, within the kind of the obviously half decent things that are out there, you're probably better off sticking with something for an extended period of time than you're moving around half a dozen times within that time, right? You're going to lose interest anyway, but you won't see any progress. You just be a beginner at 6 things rather than pretty decent at one, and pretty decent at one will probably be be a good enough probability of success, whether you're doing the best possible system out there or not. You get something half decent and you get good at it, you'll probably be negligibly worse off than if you'd done the very best out there. It's absolutely time under tension, time doing stuff, getting it bedded down, making it second nature, putting it into practice. I think that's true. And if you have time, cross train and get different ideas and build your own kind of platform and so on. But I agree. Yeah, stickability at something is probably a large benefit compared with moving around forever looking for the right thing. And even then, I say I don't know. I listen to people. I think, how do you know? How do you know? Oh, I've never seen this instructor test it against a resisting opponent. Right? Really, what would you want to do? Really take a real knife and watch them try and defeat you with a real knife? It's like there's no real testing of knife defense. There's no real testing of gun defense.
And then even it's interesting. I thought about this a lot before. Even in sort of crap, you get to E-level stuff, and they get the knives, they get the real knives out on E-camp and stuff like that. But what happens is you defend that to the point where it's then safe.
Yeah.
If I'm being attacked by a real knife and I'm fortunate enough to get hold of it, that's going through your fucking eye. There's no there's no me then pulling my punches after I've dealt with that situation.
Yeah. I've trained with real knives before, and you get that whole prickle of adrenaline. I could get cut, right? But at the end of the day, when I've got a real knife and we're trained, I'm not trying to stab you. In fact, I'm trying not to kill you, right? I'm trying my hardest not to kill you with this knife, right? Because I don't want to kill someone with this knife in training, right? And if the person in training really wants to kill you with a knife, they shouldn't be in training, right? It's just not it's not a healthy environment for that. Right. And so any normal sane person, if you introduce a real knife to a training environment, it will actually be far worse, because they'll be trying not to cut you, right? And B, you'll be trying so hard not to get anywhere near to it and control it all safely, and they will be totally unrealistic anyway, right? It's just about as far from you're better off with a foam training weapon and some heavy gloves and
be fucking committed.
Yeah, but still at the end of the day, it's just playing, right? It's not real. And therefore it's not the same as putting on gloves or going bare knuckle and trying to knock each other out, right? It's a different kettle of fish to that, right? Because what happens even if I stab you 20 times with a rubber knife? Nothing, right? It's just not the same consequences that are involved in sparring with kind of gloves, boxing sparring or something. So yeah. It's all this talk of we've got the one truth. It's like, how do you know? How do you know? Oh, well, we've reasoned it through. If you think about reality, you think, some of it I kind of get, you go, right, They don't stand still after you block the knife, right? They actually react. Yeah, of course, and that's what live training is about, right? You gotta get a reaction. It's a block and hook and grab someone with a knife, right? Imagine trying to grab that dude's wrist, right? Even if you punched him,
Even reach it, even
grab that dude's wrist, right? Even if you got hold of it, grab that dude's wrist. You're not going to have hold of it for long. Unless he's unconscious, you're not going to have hold of it for long, right? He's going to keep moving after you've hit him, right? He's not going to freeze and allow you just to grab and control him, right? So, if your training doesn't include that, right? Try grabbing the wrist. Yeah, you're not going to do it.
Yeah. Good stuff. Anyway.
Good. Right, we're up to time. We're at that hour and a quarter as usual. We'll edit it down, put some funny bits in, and I'll find the next video for hopefully next week.
Cool. Look forward to it.
All right. Good to see you.
Cool. All right. See you later.
See you soon.
See you.